Good evening. I am Reverend Mark Hughes. I'm with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. You've caught us on Juxtaposition. It's Wednesday, the second Wednesday of the month, where you'll always find us here on the second Wednesday of the month. It's the 8th of February, and good evening. Some of you are probably driving home and you're thinking about what you saw last night on the State of the Union. There was a State of the Union that happened last night. It's pretty interesting. I fell asleep, but it wasn't because the program was not interesting. It was just because I was super duper tired, and I was just trying to get a couple winks in before I had to get back up and get ready for the day. But I was just excited to think about today when I woke up. The State of the Union. What is the State of the Union? The State of the Union. Funny, because there's a whole lot of good news, and then I think about where we are as a nation, and we're still in the midst of a global pandemic. We still are in the heart of a racial reckoning. We still are just dealing with a national, we call it a mass resignation. We're in the middle of a just unprecedented rises globally, nationally rather, in crime. Global warming is on the rise. I don't want to disappoint you, but systemic racism is still a thing. Systemic racism is very much a thing. And then we still are dealing with the murders of black and brown folks at the hands of law enforcement officers. So we've got our hands full. We've got a lot of stuff going on, and I just wanted to just chime in on that. The State of the Union, when I think of the State of the Union, I think of the fact that we're still trying to build a more perfect union, and we're not there yet. And I know that the check on liberty and justice and equal protection that was written to us has still yet to be returned anything more than insufficient. We've got some issues on our hands. So today we're talking about doing the work. We'll talk a little bit about doing the work, but first I just wanted to pause for a minute, have a brief conversation about Brother Tyree Nichols. We have not released a statement publicly on Tyree Nichols, and we've done so intentionally. The truth is that we processed it internally into my staff with the Racial Justice Alliance. We had some very, very troubling and difficult conversations amongst ourselves. We continue to process it. Interestingly, everybody else had something to say about it. Everybody, even law enforcement, everybody, it would seem as though many of those statements were already pre-prepared. The thing is that when you wait, it seems like it turns out that before you can get a statement out, it's happened again. That's the sadness about what it is that we're dealing with. So what we're talking about, and everybody would like to talk about systemic racism, but let's just get a couple of things straight here. Really what we're talking about is we're talking about equal protection under the law, and we're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about a trail of blood that is leading back all the way to 1619 since the arrival of folks here in the United States. There's a lot of folks that want to play the bad apple syndrome, or to juxtapose, if you will, no pun intended, the police department with racial justice and on and on and on. And the simple fact is that black bodies are still being buried. And that's really what we come down to. And it's because of the fact of how we as a nation were built. This is not an accident. The system is working perfectly well, and what we have to do is do the work. And what we have to do is just figure out, how do we get our hands around this thing and do some substantial work and let go of the status quo and move forward. The conversation about public safety, though it seems as though it's a trope these days, if nothing more than a gaslight anymore, generally used in the midst of situations to where we want to incite fear or contempt in our communities and create division, as opposed to really doing things, getting things done. And also typically it's really called upon when we want to talk about the safety of white people in our community. So public safety, probably not going to talk about that too much during this discussion. with you on Tyree, but I will say this is we're very interested in talking about community health and wellness, and we'll continue to talk about community health and wellness because that is what we need to be talking about in the middle of a national mental health crisis, and that I think that would make everybody a little bit more safe. Prevention should also be the word of the day, we believe. In our discussions, we're looking to deploy solutions like our credible messengers model, which is in New Jersey, which is some folks who have been justice impacted, perhaps not carrying open charges, but have traversed the system and have developed relationships in and outside, and as well as learned how to navigate the system and advise and consult folks who are struggling. Because what we do know here is we have a historic school-to-prison pipeline here in the city of Burlington and across the state. Yes, indeed, oversight is a word that we want to use. But, you know, as I used to say when I was a kid, I think we should have been having that conversation all of the time. We know we should be having that conversation all of the time. It's not a lot of time and effort that we should be investing in the conversation, because if we spend too much time having that conversation, then we can't get to a conversation on economic justice. Because you see, what we really are focusing on here is, here's what we know is when there is poverty, there is instability, and when there is instability, there is crime. There is insecurity. And what we know is that historically we've seen over and over and over again where investments have been withheld from communities, where over-policing have occurred in these same communities. These communities have simply been decimated. So you have a broke, over-policed community, and then you wonder why there's a problem there. Invest in our communities. That's where we need to go with this. So that's our conversation about Tyree Nichols. My condolences go out to the family. But we came to talk about doing the work. And I'll just take a look at this graphic that's up here, because really that's what it's all about. I mean, these are the things that nobody wants to talk about. I know that there's a lot of folks who are, next slide, there's a lot of folks who have grown tired, they've grown weary because, you know, I don't know, I'm white, I'm liberal, I'm progressive, I'm tired. But it's not time to be tired right now. It's time to continue to do the work. But take a look at those platforms and initiatives for the Racial Justice Alliance, and this was last biennium. Talking about do the work this tonight, because we're going to be talking about some initiatives that we're going to be putting forward and platforms that we're putting forward this biennium. But I just want to bring your attention to those things that are at the bottom of the slide after acknowledge, create, and transform. We know that we've gotten a constitutional win, a constitutional amendment win. Eradicating systemic racism requires that we do this kind of work intentionally. So our recent work in the constitutional amendment removed the exception clauses that have permitted slavery in Vermont Constitution since 1777. See, what this did is this served to further magnify the legacy of slavery, systemic racism, which is already laid bare by the global pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. Now, the joint resolution, and you'll see there on that slide, which is Act 113, and you can just keep looking there because it's right here. What it did was it committed the legislature to sustained and deep work of eradicating systemic racism throughout the state, actively fighting racist practices, and participating in the creation of more just and equitable systems. The reason why I bring this to your attention, because the groundwork is already laid for the work that we're here to do again this year. Again, we're back just to say, do the work. What we know is the reparations task force on chattel slavery died in the legislature last session, 387. A little history about that. You can break away from that, but a little history about that is our reparations, the work of reparations in the city of, or in the state rather. It started with it was 478 in 2019, and what happened during that session is there was just a flat-out refusal to take that policy up and have a conversation about it. So the legislators the legislators, they decided that they would try something different because they didn't want to talk about reparations. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details there, but I just want to give you a fair assessment on the background of where did Truth and Reconciliation come from, because there's an active conversation going on about Truth and Reconciliation. Well, we didn't ask for it. It was the legislators, and it was because they wanted to pivot and go around this conversation, and they wanted to do something. Now, I do applaud the work that they did on the policy, and I look forward to seeing what becomes of it, but we will continue to put forward policies on reparations. It's important that we continue having a conversation on reparations. To fail to do so, what it does, it kind of flies in the face of the work that we're doing. In fact, I would say that just if you take a look at this slide here, there's a something you should know is that here, for those who are kind of squirrely about this whole idea of reparations, this is an apology from the House of Representatives. This is an apology from the United States House of Representatives on slavery. This happened in 2008. It's the same year that Barack Obama was elected president. And so I guess what we're getting at here is I wanted to just, it's very important that we understand that these conversations, since the late John Conyers introduced the reparations bill, H.R. 40 in 1989, the reparations bill has returned to Congress every single year since 1989. It's in its 34th year of returning as H.R. 4. This, what you see in front of you, is an apology. This is an apology this is an apology from the United States Senate. This is an apology from the United States Senate. So this was the following year. You see there's an exception clause there. A little disclaimer. It says that nothing in this resolution authorizes or supports any claim against the United States. You can read it there. Serves as a settlement of any claim of the United States. I just think it's important because what we see is that probably about 75%, thanks for that slide, about 75% of white folks find the conversation of reparations to be a little bit problematic, and our numbers are coming in. It seems like about 25% of black folks are too. Now, we understand that the Truth and Reconciliation bill was introduced by the legislature, but we believe that systemic racism is the legacy of slavery, and unless solutions are premised on its origins, the work to dismantle it, it's never going to be effectively accomplished. And so it's for this reason that we're going to be putting forward again the reparations bill. I want to go back to that the slide again on the platforms and initiatives and talk to you just a little bit more about some of these other things that we're doing, because what we're here to talk about today is do the work. Well, first things first. As you're looking at this, so we know the most prominent aspect of systemic racism, besides its insidiousness, is that it perpetuates a political and economic divide along racial lines. Unfortunately, and despite national attention and ongoing work in Vermont to address systemic racism, the governor's rhetoric and recommended budget to adjust, that budget adjustment rather, it doesn't really reflect the racial justice for black folks in our cities and towns as a priority. Here's what Scott said. Scott said, housing burdens, income, property value, property levels, labor force, or access to broadband, it's clear some are consistently doing better than others. The problem is that the governor's comments are solely directed at the rural versus the city inequities, and he has yet to so much as mention systemic racism and far less give any consideration to its economic impact. Governor Scott's analysis misses the fact that systemically racist policies have ensured unfair distribution of federal funds, precluding funds from equitably arriving in the communities and cities and towns where the vast majority of black Vermont resides. Single-threaded strategic approaches focus solely on rural communities in considering budget surplus and federal fund allocations fail to take into account the economic implications of systemic racism in our larger cities and towns. The administration used, watch this, the Biden administration's executive order, quote, advancing racial equity as a basis for their underserved community index. Now, given the availability and the use of such comprehensive framework for racial equity as this executive order, there is little doubt about the intentionality of the governor's approach to pursue this single-threaded rural strategy at the expense of addressing the impact of systemic racism that has recently been laid bare. Now, we're going to urge the governor to release an executive order prioritizing the eradication of systemic racism and directing the allocation of economic and other resources to address the work. That's the first things first about the work that we need to get done. Because you see, you can't edge around this thing. You can't, say, oh, the work is done in the larger cities, so now we're going to go to the rural. It's not a either or, it's a yes and. It is not a zero-sum game that we're playing here. And we cannot be fooled, those of us who are policy makers, those of us who are putting forward initiatives, those of us who are community members and you are absorbing all of this news that's out there. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, because just because we're directing our attention towards the rural doesn't mean that the work is done in our cities and towns here. Economic justice is at the heart of systemic racism, is economic inequity. This means that some people are undervalued and some people are also underserved. With the wealth gap in Vermont widening and the population of black and brown folks increasing, we owe it to ourselves to do the work on all fronts to ensure economic equity. Check this out. Here's a little graphic for you. What it demonstrates is the median wealth gap across the state, across the United States. And what you see there is the wealth, the median wealth of a black family is probably about 1/13 that of a white family. Again, we've got to focus. We've got to stay focused on doing the work. And how we do the work here, folks, in the state of Vermont, when we're addressing systemic racism, we cannot lose focus of the fact that largely systemic racism is an economic divide along racial lines. And if we are not implementing our policies, if we are not addressing policies to move in that direction, to address that gap, then we've got ourselves a problem. Even here, you see where poverty gaps are extraordinarily high for black and brown folks. In numbers, there are more white people who are poor, and that makes more sense when you have 89 to 92% of the state that's white. Yes, of course. But at the end of the day, if we're implementing good and sound policies that address the poverty of black folks, then that's going to lift everybody up from the bottom up. You see here with the census data here with the population, take a close look. What you see here is that the percentage change of black folks look at the center column, you see that the percentage change of black folks here in the state of Vermont, it has gone up 43.9%. 43.9% in the last 10 years we have gained here in the state, and 47.9% here in Chittenden County. We're urging the legislature to reintroduce and take testimony, thanks for that slide, to reintroduce and take testimony on the economic justice policy. Because if you recall on the previous slide, we'll go back to that again. What we have here on this slide is the legislative agenda, but if you see there, what didn't happen was there was a cultural and economic empowerment policy called H406 last term. We were we were able to move it out of House General into the economics committee. However, it stayed on the wall and died. So again, we've got to get this back on the radar. We understand that there's a lot of running around, and there's probably a third of the legislature that's busy, but that's new rather. But we need to get focused. We need to get focused on this policy. Again, back to systemic racism. I want to make sure that we are. I never want to let you go without seeing this. It is unjustly gained political and economic power of whites, and the continuing economic and other resources along racial lines. and the emotion-laden racist framing created by whites to maintain and rationalize their privilege. So there's, I think as we're going towards a close, and we're talking about do the work, Reverend Mark Hughes, Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, Juxtaposition, we're just talking about do the work is that a lot of folks have gotten tired. There's been a lot of excuses. I know that one of the things, as we're doing the work in the Land Access Opportunity Board, as well as the Health Equity Advisory Commission, there's conversations about, the 14th Amendment can be used to keep us from doing what it is we need to do in order to create policy specifically to address providing additional economic equity or economic opportunity for black folks. And that is true. In fact, for those who haven't been watching the 14th Amendment, bookend by the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery with an exception clause, and the 15th Amendment, voting rights, the 14th Amendment is what we call an equal protection clause. And what we know about the 14th Amendment is yes, it has in fact been weaponized. In fact, there's open cases right now against the USDA because they sought to provide some economic opportunity for black farmers. So that case is actually hung up in court right now. You should have also saw the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court just heard a 14th Amendment case. It's actually an affirmative action case. It's Chapel Hill, North Carolina, as well as we've got a Harvard University. You can expect the same results out of the Supreme Court that you saw with Roe versus Wade on the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is as far as the whole idea of this affirmative actions is all but dead. You just got to wait till June to hear them announce it. So the slide that you just saw, and go back to that for a second, we're almost out of here, but that slide that you're seeing, I like to bring this slide because these are instances where our government actually created wealth. These are instances where, more specifically, where our government created wealth for white folks. So yes, it is unfortunate. It is unfortunate, but what we're doing right now is we're going back in and we're trying to figure out how do we address that. And some of that has to do with our own equal protection clause. Thank you for that slide. So we're asking for the legislature to reintroduce the equal protection clause constitutional amendment. See, it failed in the last constitutional amendment cycle. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the Second Reconstruction Amendment, was created to provide citizenship, equal protection, due process, and certain privileges and immunities for the formerly enslaved in 1968. Over the past 155 years, the 14th Amendment has faced backlash, resistance, and has scarcely fulfilled its promises of equal protection to black Americans. The 14th Amendment is now further threatened, as I said, with the impending fatal SCOTUS decision on the affirmative action. There have also been recent, and there's also various pending decisions that are weaponized in the 14th Amendment against those that it was enacted to protect, challenging corrective and reparative economic policies. Now, our values in Vermont are to protect our citizens in instances where the federal Constitution, precedent, or even policy fail us. All Vermonters need to be provided equal protection under the law. So we're asking the legislature, go back, find PR4 from last cycle. We've already notified you. We've already showed you where it's at. Let's go ahead and get that reintroduced. Another constitutional amendment that we're putting forward this biennium is the Freeman's Clause. You see, our research unearthed the Freeman Clause in the Vermont Constitution while working to abolish slavery with PR2. Freeman is a term that was used to characterize a population of people in Vermont that would be considered qualified as candidates for county, state, as well as federal elections and eligible to vote. The implications is that there were some who were unable to run for office or vote in Vermont. A constitutional amendment removed all but one iteration of this language in 1994 under the auspices of degendering the Constitution. So we requested that the last occurrence of the Freeman Clause be removed as a part of the constitutional amendment that was associated with PR2. The Senate Government Operations Committee, they stalled on their efforts to do so But they also, at the same time, discovered and removed all instances of the Freeman Clause in Title 17 at the time of deliberations during our testimony on the constitutional amendment. Now, here's the deal. The bottom line on it is that the Freeman Clause is a legacy of slavery, and it represents the remnants of voter suppression in the state of Vermont. We're asking legislators to remove the last instance of the voter suppression clause, the Freeman Clause with a constitutional amendment. The clause, by the way, should also be removed from Title 24 Appendix, as well as the Senate Rule 84. I'll conclude with just a little bit about community wellness, because what we're also advocating is for a pilot program. The term public safety has far too long been used as a gaslight to incite fear and breed division and contempt for Black and brown folks in our communities. In no scenario there is no scenario where more policing makes everybody more safe. There is no scenario where more policing makes everybody more safe. There is no scenario where more policing makes everybody more safe. We began this work to divest from this failed model and reinvest into programs and services that promote community health and wellness in Burlington. The backlash resulted in a sustained and ongoing misinformation campaign. Community health and wellness means investing in our marginalized communities to ensure sufficient housing, education, and economic opportunity. Community health and wellness, again, it means we invest in our communities. Our proposed approach to addressing the health and wellness of our community involves a community-based pilot program in partnership with the Health and Mental Health Departments, Department of Children and Families, and the state's attorney's office, led by community members who would know the people who have experience with these and also have experience with these systems. This proposed pilot program is also going to provide a network of community leaders who will support and mentor and advise our community members who are at risk with the justice impacted. The proposed pilot also includes a community-based initiative that provides the programs and services to support youth removed from their homes in our Black and brown marginalized communities, because yes, they are removed at highly disproportionate rates as well. This program would also provide culturally informed services to support foster parents. That means That means the youth's family in those broken homes. We want to do the work there. We also even want to provide the assistance to white families that might be struggling, trying to figure out how to raise these youth. So there is a lot of work to do. We know that there's also work that needs to be done with the Cannabis Control Board. We understand that implementation and follow through on the Health Equity Advisory Commission, as well as the Land Opportunity Access Board, incredibly important. But we've got to do the work. We've got to double down. Equal protection under the law is key. Economic justice is key. That's at the top of the ticket. That's what we need to be talking about right now. For those white, progressive liberals who have gotten tired, it's time to get back up. It's time to get back to work. We've got to do the work. It's got to be economic work that we're doing. It's got to be equal protection under the law. There's a lot more to cover in terms of the emerging market with the cannabis market. It's unfortunate that they've gotten from the whole idea of legalization all the way to taxation and regulation with the rhetoric of equity, but somehow or another have forgotten to include the equity. There is no sustainable, there is no sufficient funding behind it. There is no effort to really look into these communities to say, what are we going to do to provide support for these communities that have been historically underserved. There have been no alternative programming put forward in terms of how to move this money in a reparative manner. There's no offset on excise taxes. That should be a no-brainer on this work that we do. We've got some work to do. We've got to do the work. It's so hard sometimes to do the work when it comes down to talking about money. It's been good to be with y'all tonight. Hearts and blessings and all prayers and just all kind of well wishes go out to the Nichols family, Tyree Nichols, here in the local community. Want to just give a shout out to my team at the Racial Justice Alliance and those folks that are doing the work over at the Richard Kim Center. This has been Reverend Mark Hughes, Juxtaposition. I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to hang out with you tonight. Have a good evening. We'll see you next week. We'll talk about a reconstruction. I'll leave you with this slide right here so you can give it some thought. That's what everybody's fighting over. Is it no or is it now? It's been Juxtaposition. Good evening.